Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bujan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and tonight we're celebrating one of the greatest comedic acts of all time with one of the funniest movies I've ever seen personally. From 1932, it is Horse Feathers, starring the four Marx brothers, Zeppo, Chico, Harpo, and of course, Groucho. Joining me tonight is a very special guest. He is a prolific and award-winning photographer, graphic designer, author, and musician. Please welcome Mr. Andy Marx. How are you doing tonight, Andy?
Doing good. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So I don't want to bury the lead, but, and I'm sure you get this question asked all the time, what is your relation to the Marx brothers?
Well, Groucho was, and I guess still is, my grandfather. And
Mhm.
the other brothers were my great uncles.
Growing up, I've been such a huge fan of the Marx brothers.
Well, speaking of big fan, once Groucho was standing on a street corner in New York, and Dick Cavett came up to him and introduced himself, and he stuck his hand out and he said, "Hi, Mr. Marx, I'm a big fan of yours." And it was a sweltering day in New York, and Groucho said, "Well, if it gets any hotter, I'll need a big fan."
And hey, right now I'm in Texas in the summer, so I can certainly
Is that joke?
identify.
Definitely use that. Find somebody that's a fan of you, and you can use that joke. I'm
Exactly.
sure you have a lot of fans. All right.
Oh, of course, right? Yes,
All
they
right.
come up to me all the time. Now, what was your earliest memory watching Horse Feathers?
Well, I believe I grew up in a place called Pacific Palisades, which is in California, and I remember we we lived on a corner, and my brother and I used to, and so the lot, our corner lot was, the whole thing was grass, and so my brother and I used to play baseball, and so like out in the street was center field, and I'd be out there, and my brother would be hitting balls across the street. And I remember, like my mother came out and she said, "Hey boys, come in." It was like after dinner, and she said, "I want you to see your grandfather and his brothers are on." And I went in, and it was Horse Feathers, and that's kind of what I remember. I was very young, maybe 7 or 8 or something. And then of course, they would appear on, the movies would appear occasionally, on TV, and then by the time I got to high school, you could find them. They were, this was sort of, mid to late 60s. And, there were those revival theaters, and they were starting to show like Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields. And so that was happening. And again, you'd find stuff on TV. And then when I went off to college, I went to UC Santa Barbara. And next to the college was a little town called Isla Vista. And I remember that literally within, the first couple of weeks that I was there, the little theater there was, for a week, was playing a Marx Brothers festival. And I'd go, and of course, one of the ones, was Horse Feathers. And, it was a great way to, get women, because I could say, "Hey, you want to go see my relatives in this movie?" And then I'd get another one the next night, and it was, and I saw a lot of Marx Brothers movies that year.
Yeah,
And
well,
and then I think I remember, and I believe it was Horse Feathers. After 2 years, I transferred to UCLA, and I was in the film school, and I had a film professor, and he had a list, like every week they had a different movie, and he didn't know who I was. And every week they had a different movie, and on the syllabus, or whatever you call that, was Horse Feathers, Marx Brothers movie. So I went up to the guy like the week before, and I said, "Hey, I don't know if you're interested, but I'm the grandson of Groucho. Can I introduce the movie?" So that was kind of the beginning of my doing the intros for Marx Brothers films, I think, back in college.
wow. Now let's take it back a little bit. So this movie came out in 1932. They had a string of very successful films for
Yeah,
Paramount Pictures.
right. Two. I believe that was the third movie, and it was the first movie to be made in Hollywood because the other two were made in New York.
That's right. Yeah, originally because they were doing their shows on Broadway, right? When
Right.
they
So
did.
they filmed at Astoria Studios, and
Hmm.
and so they moved to Hollywood, and this was the first one.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's such an incredibly funny film. Do you remember, did Groucho ever talk to you about his memories of making these films?
No, he actually didn't. And what's kind of funny is that like I told you, when I went off to by the time I got to college, I was pretty well versed in the Marx Brothers stuff. There was a record album out. I don't remember who released it, but there was a really great record that came out. There used to be, I mean, this is years ago, but there was a very famous disc jockey. His name was Gary Owens. And Gary Owens not only was a famous disc jockey, but he was the, again, probably before your time, but he was there was a show called Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which is a comedy show.
Mhm.
And there was a guy who was supposed to be like the radio announcer, and that was Gary Owens. So Gary Owens was the narrator on this album that was called like the Best of the Marx Brothers. And it was just a bunch of comedy bits strung together with Gary Owens introducing them. And I think they did a W.C. Fields one. So, all of my friends and everything, we knew these, and we knew all the bits. And I used to do, the dressing up and, putting on the mustache, which I'm going to get to something funny about that at college, which happened to me. So anyway, before I went off to college, I left for college in 1969. And right around that time, my father had written a show. He and his partner had written a show called Minnie's Boys, which was a musical about the Marx Brothers. And it was like, the fall of 1969. I was about ready to leave for college, and he was leaving to go to New York for like 6 months, and with his partner and his wife. Uh, and they were gonna, how you do a Broadway play, and you do rehearsals and rewrites, and you go on the road and you do the whole thing. So they had somebody threw a big party for my father, for like a going away party. And of course, my grandfather Groucho was at the party, him being my father's father. And I got to the party, and I immediately started going into reciting lines, probably from Horse Feathers, and he got kind of angry. He didn't,
Mm.
and he basically said to me, "I don't like talking about the past. It only makes you old. So stop doing that." And he was really mad. So I didn't ever do it again. And then lo and behold, 2 or 3 years later, like when he got his Oscar, he did nothing but talk about the old days, and he would be interviewed and everything. But I will tell you something funny. When I went off to uh, UC Santa Barbara, 69. And so at the end of the school year, which would have been 1970, and I lived in a dorm, they did the photo, they would do, like, for the yearbook, they would do the photos. And obviously, because there's too many people, because there's too many people there, they can't do like individual shots of every student. I think maybe they did the seniors, but for us, they went around, and I lived in a dorm, and each dorm had two stories, and each story had like 4 sections. So everybody was in their own little wing, and it was like 15 people. So when it came time to do the yearbook photo for that, I dressed up as Groucho, and I had like these weird striped pants, and I had the mustache, and I had the glasses, and at that point, I think my hair was kind of long. And I went in and I took the photo, and they didn't say anything about it, and they published it in the yearbook. What's really weird is that this weekend on Friday, I'm going to some of these guys from the dorm that I'm telling you about. I've never seen any of them since college.
Oh, wow.
A bunch of them organized for this weekend a reunion at UCSB tomorrow. And a couple of the guys have been talking about the thing with the picture. So I got to get the details on that, because I'm sure because they all thought it was hilarious that I did that, so.
Oh, no,
I,
that'll be a lot of fun. And it's like, I look at you right now, you look so much like your grandfather and your family. Those,
I hope yeah, okay. I think I look a lot like Zeppo, and probably my dad. I think we looked a lot like them, but that's fine. I'll take it.
yeah.
They
Well,
were
no, I
all,
mean, well,
they were,
Zeppo was the handsome run one, right?
right,
And the early Paramount film.
which is who I take after, I get
Yeah.
and I would say that about my son. He gets his good looks from Zeppo.
Look, I'm such a huge fan again of the Marx Brothers. I love Abbott and Costello, Bob Hope, a lot of these amazing comedians. But you look at a lot of these films from the 30s and 40s, a lot of these comedies, they have a charm to them, right? But you watch the Marx Brothers movies, especially these movies. Here we are over 90 years later. These movies are still genuinely funny and subversive. Why is that?
I mean, some of it is probably luck. I mean, I always, I have this kind of a weird thing that I always think about. And, I don't know if you if like somebody, you don't have to believe in God, but I do feel, and there were two things that took place in the 20th century that will make you, if not believe in God, will make you believe in a higher power. And one of
Hmm.
those is the Beatles. Okay. Because when you read, the coincidences and how they got to, everything, it just doesn't seem like, how did this happen? Okay, so that's what I say about them. And then the other cultural thing is the Marx Brothers. So you basically, you know, if you look at like the Three Stooges, they all kind of did, the three of them sort of did the exact same thing. They just, they would hit each other. No, there was nothing, really different. I guess Mo was supposed to be like the more intelligent one and he was like in charge, but it got monotonous quickly. And I used to love the Three Stooges. But look at the Marx Brothers. Again, it's like the Beatles. So you have these four brothers that were basically raised kind of in poverty. Okay. Uh, the fact that their mother kind of rounded them up and said, you're going to go, you're going to be in vaudeville or you're going to be performers. Okay. So now you take Groucho, who intellectually was quite, I mean, he was an intellect. I mean, he was smart, he was well read, but none of them like really went to school. They kind of, went to, I don't know, junior high or something. Uh, and and Groucho can talk a mile a minute, with the wisecracking and just and everything. But he's also got that incredible physical thing with the dancing, and the stuff. So like, where did he learn to do that? I mean, okay, they didn't like go to school to learn any of that. Okay, I mean, it's like, where did Paul McCartney like learn to play the bass, since that was not even his instrument, when he just switched over one day and then turns out to be like one of the greatest bass players ever. So it's like, Groucho, where did he learn that? Okay, then let's move on to Harpo. I had lunch one day at Groucho's house with Marcel Marceau, the French mime, and he said to me, he said, your great uncle Harpo is the greatest mime who ever lived. Okay, another guy, no lessons. Where did this come from? And he played the harp. Not just sort of okay. He really, really could play the harp. He probably did take some lessons, but you have that. Okay, then you have Chico, again, with a whole sort of a different comedy persona, just invented out of nothing, and an incredible piano player. And then you have the three of them sort of together, which is, I mean, again, it's so some of it, like I say, it's luck. I don't know how it happened. And you're
Hmm.
right. You're right. It really does. They've really withstood the test of time. Although I will tell you, I meet kids and I actually, it's funny. I'm a swimmer and I go every day and I swim at there's a pool in West Hollywood, and I go to the pool and it's like summer, so they have like these young kids, like checking you in when you go. And there's a kid there, very nice kid, and he's probably a junior in high school, and he sees my name, Marx. He goes, "Oh, are you related to Karl Marx?" And I go, and I go, "No, I'm actually related to Groucho Marx." And of course, he said, "Who?" He did
Oh
not
my
know.
God.
He did not know who he was. But then, like 2 days later, I came back and he was there, and he told me that I guess he told his grandfather. His grandfather was probably my age, but he told his grandfather, and then his grandfather told him, which he told me. He goes, "Oh, well, I always quote, Groucho's famous line about, never joining a club that would have me as a member." So,
Hmm.
so he was very impressed that like his grandfather knew who the Marx Brothers were. And then I said, "Well, by the way, that line is used by Woody Allen in Annie Hall, because he references Groucho. And I'm pretty sure he said to me he did not know who Woody Allen was. So I don't know I don't know what to do anymore. So, I
Right.
mean, you
Well, I
can't
get
you can't push it on. It's just what it is.
right. I mean, that's a good segue for my next question. If there's anyone in the audience who has somehow never seen a Marx Brothers movie, what do they have to look forward to in Horse Feathers?
Well, I mean, like I just said, you got the quick-wittedness of I mean, the opening speech by Groucho is incredible. He then sings, I believe he sings whatever it is, I'm against it. Great dancing, great stuff with Chico and Harpo. I mean, you're gonna basically just see everything I just described when I said, how genius they actually were. And you get a full kind of thing in this movie.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Mr. Andy Marks, thank you so much for your time. If you're in the audience, please stick around after the movie so you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, from 1932, directed by Norman MacLeod, Horse Feathers. I think this movie has one of my favorite lines in any movie, and I always think about it where uh, one of the members of the school board or Groucho suggests, "Why don't we tear down the dorms?" And then
Right.
one of the other guys says, "Well, if we tear down the dorms, where are the students going to sleep?"
Right.
Well, where they always do, in the classroom.
Right, right. And I think, getting back to my days at college when I was at UCSB, like I said, I would dress up as Groucho. And of
Mhm.
course, I would do that opening, students of Huxley students, members of the faculty and faculty members. Well, I guess that covers everyone, and I would launch, right into the speech. There's always pretty much in every sort of not so much with Night at the Opera, but with some of the other ones, it starts and there's Groucho doing, some kind of a funny speech or, a monologue, which is good.
Yeah, well, the formula certainly worked. Now I know in his later years you came to work for your grandfather. So how did
Yeah.
this relationship come about?
Well, I mean, I'd always been very close to him. He didn't have that many. I mean, there was just me and my brother. My brother's a little older than I am. What happened was I got out of college in '73, and somebody invited me over to the house to meet. Oh, well, what actually happened was I don't know if you want me to, I'll say there's a story that I've written about how this came about. What happened was I was having lunch over at Groucho's one day, and it was, let me see, it was Marcel Marceau, Jack Nicholson, and I believe Elliot Gould, and they were there for lunch, and the phone rang, and it was somebody calling from New Jersey. Excuse me. It was somebody calling from New Jersey, well, they told me because I ended up picking up the phone, saying that they had a bunch of reruns of You Bet Your Life or Best of Groucho, and if you don't want them, we're going to just throw them away.
Oh,
'Cause
wow.
they didn't have room for them. And this is what they did with a lot of stuff like that. So I said, well, send them on out. And so what I thought was going to be a few reels of film was like 3,500 reels. It was like it was, I think it was 300 shows times 10 because there were 10 copies of each show. So it was like 3,000 rolls. And, and
Sure.
literally there were like 8 UPS trucks pulling up to the house. So I decided that I said we should do something with these. And so I kind of gave myself a job and I became the archivist, and I was up at the house, for like 2 or 3 years doing nothing but like screening these. Groucho and I would have lunch every day. And then after lunch, he would watch a couple, and which was kind of cool because he would make comments, about different. He'd go, "Oh, I remember, and you got to remember, he was already in his 80s by then. He was like
Mhm.
83 or 84, and he would go, "Yeah, I remember that Eskimo woman that was there. She was funny, and she was with this guy," and he would do a thing. So I ended up spending a lot of time up there. We got pretty close, and then towards the end, he got kind of sick, and they made me his kind of co-conservator with the Bank of America, and I just was the conservator for taking care of his health and all that. So that's what it
Mhm.
was. Yeah, that was good. That was a nice experience.
As you kind of alluded to earlier, there was a little bit of a Groucho revival in the 60s and
Yeah.
70s.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, it
and
was huge. I
yeah,
mean, because well, he got his Academy Award. He got an honorary Academy Award, him and the brothers. So that was huge. And then it was like a circus, until he died. I mean, there's
well,
celebrities. I mean, it was just, you'd go in there and there'd be, I mean, anybody would be there like for dinner, Jack Lemmon would be there, probably Barbara, just all of these like people. And of course I dug it because I kind of was like big fans of all these people. So that was cool.
Yeah, you mentioned Jack Nicholson. I've always heard Alice Cooper was a close friend of
Yeah,
Groucho.
I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a thing, and I'm not sure who spreads that. He was over. I mean, he was over there quite a bit, but I don't know. There's a couple stories that I don't that I hear mentioned about him, which I'm not sure happened, but whatever. I mean, Alice was there. I remember eating lunch with him, and he'd be there. So
Sure.
he didn't totally. That's not a totally made up thing. He was there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's at least that part of it is good to hear the fact that you hear about so many of these great artists, whether they be actors, musicians, comedians, where they burn bright early on, and then unfortunately in their later years they kind of fall out of favor, and then they're not really reevaluated until after they're gone. But it was good to hear that at least Groucho got to see that appreciation for his
Yeah.
work in those later years.
Well, it's funny. I mean, especially with comedies. I mean, part of the rediscovery of the Marx Brothers was kind of the whole thing that started to take place in the mid to late '60s, which was the film the film nerddom that took over the colleges, and they had film schools and people were watching movies, and there
Mm-hmm.
was a great sense of discovery of all of these movies. So and the Marx Brothers happen to be along, on that one. It's like I said when I had the film course at UCLA, like every week I saw a different movie that I never even heard of. Now of course you go, how could you not have heard of that? I mean, these are like some of the greatest, just some of the greatest movies ever. And so he did get that. One of the things about comedies that's kind of interesting is that most people that just kind of do comedies, you know, they they sort of have kind of a 10-year, if you no matter who, if you look at anybody, Jim Carrey or whatever, it lasts about 10 years unless they pivot onto something else, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they make kind of, and the Marx Brothers is the same. I mean, it was about 10 years basically, they made the first movie was what, like 27 or something, and by the late 40s that was, or I mean the late 30s, that was pretty much it. And then they made some movies that were not very good.
Right. So, I mean, of course, Groucho was able to reinvent himself as a radio personality, a television
TV. Yeah.
personality.
Yeah.
But did he ever have that drive? I want to be a dramatic actor now. Because I mean, so many of these actors want to pivot, like you said, Jim Carrey and all those guys.
Right. No, I don't think so. I mean, his thing was he always wanted to be a writer. That was his thing. And he wrote a few books and stuff. He wrote a play that he wrote a play with a fairly famous screenwriter named Norman Krasna. It was called Time for Elizabeth, and I think it ran. And he's written a few books and stuff. So, but that was always, he loved writers. Before the whole kind of circus thing started in the '70s. You'd go for dinner and there would always be like some cool writers there. Not, he didn't have patience, for actors, I don't think. But then, of course, later on he did.
Mm-hmm.
Hence Jack Nicholson, there, but for dinner. But he,
Certainly. So, but when we think of Groucho, of course, there's that iconic kind of quick-wittedness, those one-liners.
yeah.
Of course, it's played up on screen and on stage, but like, how much of that was him in real life? Was he really
Well,
that funny?
yeah, he was pretty good. I mean, I guess he had been doing it so long that he could do it, but I mean, it's just, I mean, it was almost like it was expected of him. So somehow he willed funny stuff, to come out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the line? He was in an elevator like with a priest. I don't know if you know this line. And the priest said to Groucho, he introduced himself and he said, Mr. Marx, I just want to tell you how much joy you brought into the world. And Groucho turned to him and he says, well, I want to tell you how much joy you've taken out of the world. So, that's kind of that's sort of an obvious, retort to something like that. But it was kind of like, he sort of, had that thing going on and could kind of do that. And I mean, I think a lot of, comedians that are really good, I think can sort of do that. They're in a
Okay.
thing, they can do an ad lib and they.
Oh no, absolutely. It becomes part of the muscle memory, I would
Yeah,
think.
totally. Absolutely. I mean, I can do that sometimes with people. I can get off a snappy remark, with somebody, and people go, "Oh, you sound like Groucho." So,
Yeah. Now
yeah.
you mentioned earlier that you do favor your uncle Zeppo. What was your relationship with the other brothers like?
Well, I mean, well, first of all, Harpo and Chico died pretty young. They died in the 60s, so I wasn't very old at that point. They died young. I mean, well, actually, I guess they were in their 70s, but they died.
They died when you were young.
Yeah, they died, but
Yeah.
I mean, they died in like 65 and 66 or something like that. So they were like maybe in their early 70s.
Hmm.
Groucho lived to be, he was almost what, 90, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's
Uh,
just kind of fascinating too when you think about it. It's weird watching these films because we always think of Groucho being the elder statesman. He's the ringleader, but he was
yeah.
actually the youngest of the three,
No,
right? The main.
yeah, he was the middle child.
Hmm.
I believe it was Chico, Harpo, Groucho, Zeppo, and Gummo.
Hmm.
And they kind of I this is sort of weird, but I'm not sure about the Harpo. Yeah, no, I think Chico died first, Harpo died, Groucho died, Gummo, I think Gummo died, and then maybe Zeppo or Zeppo and then Gummo. But it was kind of in their birth order
Hmm.
that they died.
And did you ever get to talk to Zeppo? Why did he decide to call it quits after Duck Soup?
I mean, I just know what I've read. I don't,
Sure.
I mean, I would have been too young again to probably, and I didn't see much of him once, because he lived down in Palm Springs, so I just wouldn't have seen him all that much. I'd see him, up at the house or something, but that would be it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, before we close out, there was one aspect I was always curious about, and I guess nothing ever came of it. I heard at one point Rob Zombie was attached to direct a biopic of Groucho. Do you know anything about this? How
Yeah, it
close is
was it
that?
was it was not a biopic of Groucho. There was a guy who worked up at the house when I was there, and he did the fan mail, and so he wrote a book called Raised Eyebrows. So
Hmm.
once, and he just wrote a book about his like 2 years working at the house. That's all it was. And Rob Zombie apparently was attached at one point, but he fell out of it. And I don't know, I don't know. I mean, there are other people. I don't know if you know the screenwriters Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski. They wrote
Ed Wood, right?
yes, very good. But
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the Ed Wood, Man on the Moon, People versus Larry Flint. I mean, they have like 50 credits. They did the OJ, Ryan Murphy thing. At one point, they had a Marx Brothers thing kind of in development at Universal, and that was a full on like cradle to grave Marx Brothers movie. And, it didn't get made. Those things are hard to make. They're expensive, they're period, they're just, who are you going to get? That's the other thing. Who are you going to get to play? I mean, like when you're making Ed Wood and nobody's seen Ed Wood anywhere, you can get Johnny Depp to play him. Or if you're going to do, the People versus Larry Flint or, Man on the Moon. Well, actually, Man on
Hmm.
the Moon. I mean, that was Andy Kaufman, and that is a guy that you did see a lot. But a lot of times, and the knock is always that, like somebody makes if somebody were to make a movie and then they go, well, why do we need to watch this? We can just go see the real Marx Brothers. We
Yeah.
see one of their movies, and unless you figure out kind of a way to do it that doesn't rely so much on the Marx Brothers shtick, and you're doing kind of some other story. So
Hmm.
who knows?
Right. Well, before we close out, I always thought this was a little bit of well, actually, there's a couple of points I want to get to. I think we have to mention in the film. So frequently, when I think of the Marx Brothers, I always think of, the fifth Marx brother, Margaret Dumont, who was their
Yeah,
frequent leading
right,
lady, who was very hilarious, is like essentially the
right,
straight man in a
yeah,
lot of those early movies. But in
right.
this film, we have the gorgeous Thelma Todd
That's
as
yeah,
the romantic love interest
yeah.
of the
I don't know
brothers.
why. Again, I'm not so much always into the minutia of every little thing. I don't know why, why that happened.
Hmm.
Do you have any idea?
I don't
I mean,
know. I think maybe for the sake of the script, you wanted someone like a little bit sexier. You want to
right.
spice it up a little bit. I
And
mean,
you also needed somebody that, that was seductive, because that's kind of,
Hmm.
so because Margaret Dumont never was trying to seduce Groucho. He was always trying to seduce her, but the Thelma Todd thing was sort of different.
It's a role reversal, really.
Yeah, I mean, she's a little more trampy, and I mean, isn't she with Zeppo in the beginning? Isn't she
Yeah,
like,
she's with Zeppo, and then yeah, and then Groucho plays Zeppo's father in the film.
right? I know, which is kind of
Yeah.
weird. I know.
Thelma Todd unfortunately had a very sad
No,
fate.
I don't know.
Only a
You
few years.
talk about it. I don't. I mean, that's fine. I'm not that up on it.
Oh, so this movie came out in 1932. In 1935, Thelma Todd, they found her body. I guess she had suffocated or it was carbon monoxide poisoning. They found her body in the car in a garage. And she
Right.
was only 29 years old at the time. And I know that foul play was suspected. The police investigated into it, but they could never find anything. So, I mean, the police ruled it basically an accidental suicide.
Yeah, yeah, and you managed to bring down the entire evening.
I know I did, but I felt like it was worth mentioning because she's so beautiful. She's so funny
Yeah,
in this
no, no,
movie.
you're right. You had to mention it. That's all right.
Yeah.
All right,
And
guys,
well,
cheer up. Don't listen to him about that.
we'll bring it up. We'll bring it up. Oh, well, I did want to bring up this other sad point. I promise we'll bring it back
Oh, we're really
around.
going into sad points. Okay.
I know, I know.
Go ahead.
That's life, right?
That is life.
Well, Groucho, I believe he passed away. It was August 1977. And
It was August 19th, 3 days after Elvis died.
right, and that was what I wanted to get to. My understanding was, Elvis's death had shocked America. It had taken over the headlines.
Yeah.
Do you feel like Groucho's passing had a lot of exposure? Or do you feel like it was kind of buried at that time?
I don't think it was buried, but the Elvis thing was just, a lot bigger. But,
Yeah.
it's funny when Groucho, by the time he passed away, there was a lot of stuff going on with him between the conservator fight, when they made me the conservator, and being famous again and rediscovered. So it wasn't, like it was on like page 30 of Groucho Marx passed away. It was a huge, I mean, as I recall, it was the banner headline of like the LA Times or something, and I
Hmm.
actually I think I was the spokesman or something. I had to go out and like talk to the press. But I mean,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, so you can say, well, Elvis overshadowed him a little bit, but you know you died, so you got some good, whatever, you died. That's the least thing you're going to complain about, is that you didn't get as much exposure. But
Of course. Well,
yeah,
do you have any
I I, I
personal?
think I'm
Oh, I'm
sorry.
sorry.
No, I
No,
was just
no.
going to say, I think I've heard Groucho fanatics saying, especially people who didn't like who didn't like Elvis, go, oh, that's so terrible. But it's, I mean, it is what it is, and it's not something to really go into. It's not that.
Of course. Well, do you have any other personal anecdotes, any stories about your grandfather that you want us to know about?
Well, I remember another time I told you that he didn't like it when I talked about the old stuff. But another time when I was in college, I don't know what, maybe I was in a journalism class or something, but I said, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go interview my grandfather Groucho. And I called him up and I said, hey, could I interview you for my college thing? And he goes, yeah, and I can't. And I went down there and I had a tape recorder with me. And he goes, sorry, I don't let Life magazine tape record me. You can't record me. So that was it. He
Oh,
was
wow.
grouchy. He was grouchy. What else? Well, I used to love like playing the piano for him at his house, and he would sing all those Groucho songs that he used to sing. That was kind of fun. I mean, it was really nice at the end because I literally spent like 3 years with him, like pretty
Yeah.
solid, and that was really cool.
Well, it's wonderful you still have those memories. I know I'm certainly grateful for you sharing them with us here
Well, you're
tonight.
anytime, man, anytime.
Thank you so much. Well, let me ask you too. I'm curious. You mentioned you played the piano for him. Obviously, you're very musically talented. Chico, that was his signature, was the piano.
Yeah,
Harpo had the
yeah,
harp. Did
yeah,
Groucho play an instrument?
yeah. He played the guitar, and as you can see behind me, I actually also play the ukulele because you can see a ton of them behind me.
Oh, wow.
And actually, when I do my Gus Kahn show, I actually do it. I accompany myself on the ukulele. Uh,
Hmm.
yes, he played the guitar, and he had, apparently my brother was telling me, because my brother's a musician, and my brother's a bass player, but he also like plays guitar and stuff. And I guess I think he might own the guitar Groucho owned, and it's some kind of a Martin or something, but apparently it's like a really cool guitar. So yeah, he was really I think he took lessons and he was pretty into it. So that's kind of cool. I like
Oh,
that.
wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, no, absolutely. Well, you mentioned the Gus Kahn show. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? And
Yeah.
what? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's called It Had to Be it's called It Had to Be Gus and Groucho too, and it's basically the life and songs of my other grandfather, Gus Kahn, and the title is a play on one of his most famous songs, which is "It Had to Be You." He wrote "It Had to Be You," "Making Whoopee," "Dream a Little Dream of Me," "I'll See You in My Dreams," "Yes Sir, That's My Baby," "Pretty Baby," "The One I Love Belongs to Somebody Else." So I do a show and I kind of go through his life, singing. It's an hour long, and I do the songs and I talk about Groucho, and we got a little comedy in there, and we got some nice singing and some nice songs, and it's kind of a sing along. Depending on the audience, but a lot of times, like at the TCM show, I mean that was a total sing along. Everybody in the audience sang along because they all know the song. So it's cool. I started developing it actually before COVID, and then COVID came along. That was kind of the end of that. And then I don't know, I kind of took it up again, and and then it just kind of took off. And I've done a number of shows this last year, and I mean this year, and it's kind of cool. So
Well, I know I certainly want to see it. I think we
all
have to
right,
bring it to
well,
Texas at
all
some
right,
point.
let's do a tour in Texas. Get me the 4 homes, and I'll traverse the state trying to do that.
Yeah, I'll
How's
see what I can do.
Yeah, see what
And
you can do. That's cool.
yeah, like your grandfather and his brothers, you're incredibly multi-talented with your photography career. Is there
Oh,
anything
thank you.
else you're working on right now you want us to know about?
No, I mean, my sort of main, I kind of fell into these other things kind of I mean, I basically mostly was a writer. And so, I still have a writing partner. And, I don't know, it's the tip of, the strike kind of killed everything this last year. And so I don't, it's like we have some projects with producers and they're trying to set them up. And, who knows? That's kind of why I do these other things because, I kind of wait around for that. And yeah, it's funny. I got into the photography during the last writer's strike in 2007 because that went on for ages. And then my photography career kind of really took off. And then COVID hit, kind of killed that. But anyway, that was that. So that's what I do.
Well, it's certainly been a pleasure getting to talk with you today. Mr. Andy Marks, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, if you're in the audience, I hope you enjoyed tonight's film as much as we did. Once again, my name is Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.